Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville, which I'm now calling to order. Madam Clerk, we have no regrets. And Council, do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest? Madam Clerk, I see none. Council, the first thing we have to do is resolve into Committee of the Whole. A mover, Councillor Duddock, a seconder, Councillor Hutchins. All in favor? Opposed, if any? We're now resolved into a special form of meeting called Committee of the Whole that permits a slightly more relaxed environment where we can engage more with the public and receive more information than in a normal council meeting. Council, I'd like to call your attention to the first three items on the agenda, which are under the consent agenda. Unless there's any desire to take up one of those matters, I'd look for a motion to pass the consent agenda. Councillor O'Meara.
So moved, all three items.
Thank you. I don't need a second in Committee of the Whole. Was that you wanting to separate something?
Merely wish to double check that there is nobody here from the public who wished to speak to any of the consent items. Okay, then
Shall
I'm
I call
happy.
the vote? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? The consent items are adopted. Generally, the consent items are very small items judged to be of no public controversy or other weight. Now, Councillor O'Meara, that's for the clerk. I just want to confirm that you were also intending to include in your motion C1, the confidential consent items.
I'll go with a yes on that.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, you got that? So that brings us to our first public hearing item, the public meeting report and zoning bylaw amendment for Biddington Homes. We have a registered delegation on this from Biddington, and normally that means they're here to answer questions, if any. And Council, if you give your attention to the podium, Lee will walk us through a summary for the benefit of the public.
Members of the Council, this evening you can find my staff report on page 13 of tonight's agenda. This is a statutory public meeting for a zoning bylaw amendment application submitted by Biddington Homes Oakville, Inc. These applications were received on September 24th, 2015. They were deemed complete on September 29th, and a public information meeting was held on November 18th. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain any public input related to this application. Planning staff are not making any recommendation with respect to this application. We're just asking Council to receive the report. This application was submitted to allow the site to be developed for 32-unit stacked townhouse development. The site is generally located west of Trafalgar Road, south of Glen Ashton Drive, and north of Lillican Street. A municipal address has not been assigned to the block. In terms of a little bit of background, these lands are actually part of a Kilberry subdivision, which was located to the south. These were draft approved in 2011 and registered in 2013. However, during the processing of that subdivision, these lands were identified as having some environmental and land use matters that would potentially impact the development of the site. These matters related to identification of a wetland feature on an adjacent hydro corridor, and also identification of one provincially significant tree species at risk. In addition, this block was also partially located within the Trafalgar Road corridor study. As a result, the rezoning of this subject site was deferred until the completion of the Trafalgar Road study. And that study was approved by Council in October of 2014. Following the study, a site-specific Main Street 2 land use designation was established for the lands, which allowed an opportunity for the lands to be developed only for residential uses, consisting of a minimum of a 2-story building to a maximum of a 4-story building. The intent of the current zoning proposal before you this evening is to rezone the subject lands to permit the development of 2 residential buildings, 4 stories in height, in a manner which would recognize the wetland feature and associated buffer, as well as retain the provincially significant tree species at risk on the subject site. The property is irregular in shape. It's approximately 0.45 hectares in size and has approximately 35 meters of frontage on Glen Ashton Drive. The property does also have frontage on Lillican Street to the south. The site is proposed to be developed in 2 blocks with a north block containing 16 residential units and the south block also containing 16 residential units. There's 11 visitor parking spaces proposed on the site, whereas 8 is required, and the applicant is proposing 40 residential parking spots. The majority of the parking will be located below grade. Access to the site is proposed from Glen Ashton Drive only. Given the proximity of this site in relationship to the Trafalgar Road intersection and an existing median along Glen Ashton Drive, access is proposed to be right in and right out only. An issue has been identified with respect to the feasibility of a right in, right out access to the site, and planning staff have met with the applicant to explore access options from Lillican. The access issue will be further explored with the applicant and will be addressed in the future recommendation report. The hydro corridor runs along the western property boundary of the site, and through the review of the original subdivision, a wetland feature was identified on the hydro corridor with a small portion of it on the subject site. The limits of the wetland feature were staked by the Town and Conservation Authority in 2014. In accordance with conservation halt and regulatory requirements, a 15-meter buffer is proposed around the limit of the wetland. The proposed development respects the wetland buffer, except for a small portion of one parking space. The applicant has been advised of this issue and will revise the plan accordingly. A provincial tree species at risk has been identified on the site. The applicant and planning staff have been in contact with the Ministry of Natural Resources to determine the appropriate buffer around the tree. Once the appropriate buffer is determined, the concept plan will be further refined and will also be addressed in a future recommendation report. The applicant has provided some elevations just for a concept for your review. These are the elevations for the north block. Essentially, it's a 4-story building with a rooftop terrace. The elevations for the southern block are, again, very similar. The only difference between the north block and the south block is the south elevation has the access to the underground parking. In the livable Oakville plan, the site is designated as Main Street 2, is shown on Schedule I, Central Land Use. The livable Oakville plan has site-specific policies for the site which will only permit residential uses on the land with a minimum of 2 stories and a maximum of 4 stories. The applicant intends to conform with the official plan. The lands are currently zoned existing development. The applicant is requesting a site-specific residential medium-density zone to implement the land use and establish appropriate regulations for the site. Any future zoning on the land will recognize the wetland feature and associated buffer and will retain the provincial tree species at risk. A public information meeting was held on November 18th last year and was attended by both ward councillors. No members of the public attended. Matters to be considered within the future recommendation report include conformity with the livable Oakville policies, a comprehensive review of the merits and suitability of access from Glen Ashton Drive and Lillican Street, protection and retention of the wetland feature, and appropriate setbacks from the provincial tree species at risk. Planning staff will continue to review and analyze the merits of this application and all technical matters. We will review any issues that have been identified this evening, and we will bring forward a report at a future date. In conclusion, staff put forward the following recommendation for your consideration, and I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Councillor, the questions? Councillor Knoll.
Thank you, Ms. Musson, for the presentation. I expressed my concern at the public information meeting and subsequently about the access. You raised it during your report. Just a couple of points of clarification. First of all, is it correct that when we originally dealt with this application years ago, which resulted in the development to the south of the proposed development, it was always contemplated that there would be access through from River Oaks right through to Glen Ashton? Is that accurate?
Through you, Your Worship, the Kilberry subdivision did have a connection from River Oaks all the way up to Glen Ashton. It would have been further west of where this particular block was. The reason why that connection didn't go forward was because through the review of the subdivision, the wetland feature was identified, which is why Lillican currently ends in a cul-de-sac.
So Is there a physical constraint then? So you're saying because of the wetland, why can't we have that access? Like, I don't really understand. It's a wide piece of property. What's the issue with the access right through from River Oaks?
The access, originally, the subdivision back in 2011,
Right.
it went up through Lillican. It swung actually to the west over the hydro corridor,
Right.
adjacent to the townhouses that currently front on Glen Ashton.
Right.
That would have lined up with an existing street across the road.
Right.
This particular site, if you were to put a public road through, it's, first of all, the width of a public street would not leave any development potential on the site, but also connecting to Glen Ashton on this block of land would, is too close to the intersection, so you can only have a right-in, right-out access. You wouldn't be able to have a full moves.
In your opinion, at this, maybe it's early to ask this question, but is it practical truly to have a right-in, right-out only when there's a median dividing the road, which is going to potentially result in U-turns and all kinds of traffic chaos during rush hour periods? Do you see that as a challenge? And if you do, what sort of options might be available to ameliorate that?
Through your worship, public safety obviously is a concern. Staff has flagged this as an issue, which will be addressed in a future recommendation report. The option, if the Glen Ashton connection isn't proposed or is eliminated, and then we have access from Lillican, there's a couple of things the planning staff need to look at. One is a discussion with the region of Halton with respect to having a private driveway over top of the regional easement. There's a water main easement that runs through the site. I did have some preliminary discussions with the region, and they don't have any issues with regards to driveways and parking on their easement. The other issue that I need to address, and I need to have some further discussions with fire to ensure that the fire route is appropriate for the site. There is a constraint, obviously, for access to ensure that it's in between the wetland buffer and the buffer of the tree species at risk. Through preliminary review, there appears to be an appropriate amount of space to have a private driveway through there. Still need to have some discussion with our forestry staff to ensure that that tree buffer is not impacted.
And where is that regional right-of-way that you're referring to? I'm looking at the diagram on page 15 of the report. Yeah, that's the same one I'm looking at.
If you look on the screen, and I don't know how well you can see it, this dashed line through the site here, you can sort of see it runs down, and it just skirts the wetland buffer. That is the regional water main easement. So currently, as proposed, there is some parking on top of the easement. There is a portion of the driveway on top of the easement, and it will continue down to Lillican. So the thought is to have access would run across that easement. This garbage container would have to it would have to be in a different location. And the thought is perhaps having the Glen Ashton entrance completely removed and just having the access totally from Lillican Street.
Okay, well, I would certainly look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Regarding the elevation between the north and the south, is there any elevation difference? Recently, I've had a problem in my own, and in Roger and myself's own ward, where there was a huge difference in elevation. And I just want to make sure there isn't any difference whatsoever.
From my cursory review, the elevation is pretty consistent across the site, but I can look at that further and report back to you in the recommendation report. In order to get to the underground garage, they do have to grade down, so the garage is below the first level. So there will be some grade difference with regards to the access to the underground garage.
So when the cars come out, will they be shining their lights then coming up the ramp onto the people to the north?
The garage entrance is to the south, so they would, if the driveway is, the access is relocated down to Lillican, they would be coming out pretty well, they would be coming up and then meeting the grade at Lillican.
Okay.
We could, I mean, there is the wetland feature there, so that can buffer some of the headlights. And also landscaping could be and will be addressed through a future site plan.
Yeah, that'd be good if you could consider that, because once it's as built, then all of a sudden it's too late to do anything. With regard to the zoning, does this zoning fit exactly with the official plan?
It will be a site-specific zoning for this development. We'd want to include regulations to ensure the development doesn't encroach into the wetland feature and into the buffer of the tree species, so that we would have it written in such a way to ensure that the buildings are located more to the north of the block.
So, because we had an issue not that long ago where the zoning was one thing and the official plan was different, and it turned out the official plan trumps zoning in that case, and this would be the same case here. All of us, like, what could happen here? With what you're
Counselor,
looking at.
what we heard was that the official plan allows up to 4 stories, and this is an application for 4. So I'm not sure there's a conflict there.
So zoning will be written to comply with the official
So
plan.
the official plan now says 4 stories here,
2 to 4 stories.
2 to 4. And the zoning will be 2 to 4, but then special,
It will be a site-specific zoning to address this particular development, ensuring the setbacks for the wetland and the buffer around the tree.
okay, because I just want to make sure that gets nailed down so that all of a sudden they're not coming back where they don't want that site specific. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Grant?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd mentioned earlier I may not have any comments, but actually I lied. There's one thing. With the traffic brief that's coming back, I think it might be useful for us, given the Lillican connection down to River Oaks, if we could extend the traffic study to Wembley and then to the areas south of Wembley to Meadowdale and, Meadowland and all of that, just because that would be a natural turning point for a lot of people who realized, oh, I can't turn properly onto that street. They would want to cut down through that neighborhood. So it might be useful to take a look at the traffic impacts on that community as well. Please and thank you.
The applicant's in the audience, so they'll I'm sure they heard that as well.
Great, thank you.
Well, all right then. Are there any members of the public with information for council on this matter? Would the representative from Biddington have any information for council? Welcome, Ms. McPherson.
Thank
We
you.
look forward to your information.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. My name is Lori McPherson. I'm with Bosefields Inc., and we're the planning consultants for the applicant. And I don't have anything to add to Ms. Musson's presentation. We did meet with staff last week to go over the issue of the road, and we are taking a look at it in terms of the fire, the regional easement. There's a number of things we have to take a look at, realigning the blocks potentially. So we are looking into that, and we will continue to work with staff on that issue. And really, we're here to answer any questions you may have.
I have a small question for you. Looking at this and hearing all what I just heard about traffic, I'm wondering, in your professional opinion, is this susceptible of being perceived as overdevelopment of the site?
No, in my opinion, it is not. Over 50% of the site will still remain landscape, so it's not, and the FSI, I recall, is under 1, I believe. It was looked at specifically in the Trafalgar Road study as an intensification site because of its location close to the regional transportation hub. The only reason it has a different designation than the Trafalgar Road frontage is because it is adjacent to residential, so therefore there's no commercial uses permitted on the ground floor as it would be along Trafalgar. But this is a site that the study looked at for intensification.
But in terms of the traffic
Yes.
restrictions, it was really what prompted me to ask
Okay,
you
sorry.
if it was susceptible of being perceived as overdevelopment.
So when the Dunbar proposal was going through, the one that faces onto Trafalgar Road, 132 units, I believe, we had our traffic consultants look at the report that they submitted and do some number crunching on their own to make sure that the Dunbar could work fine on Lillican, and assuming a development in our site, they looked at that and felt it could work. At the time, there was no connection to Lillican that we're potentially looking at now. It was right in, right out on Glen Ashton, but it is only 32 units that's being proposed at this point, and there's 180 plus south of it. The traffic study also looked at provision for other sites along that corridor, which also may add into Lillican, and the traffic people said that it worked. So that's why our client did not have an issue with the Dunbar proposal ultimately.
Thanks very much for your information. I don't see any others. Thank you. Let's turn to the ward councillors in case one of them would like to move receipt of the information. Councillor Knoll, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you, one and all. Now, the next item, number 5. The only thing wrong with the electronic approach to meetings is you have to finger flip like crazy here. But here we are, public meeting and recommendation report, housekeeping and technical corrections, zoning bylaw amendment 2016-13. And Mr. Nethery, you can summarize for the public what council has poured over in advance of the meeting.
I sure can, Your Worship, and thank you, members of council. Very simply, I'm back here before council tonight with a further housekeeping amendment for your consideration. Per previous amendments, there's 3 general themes within this. A series of text edits to help clarify certain interpretations, correcting some awkward and missing information that has since been caught on further review and implementation of the bylaw, as well as 1 mapping correction that has also been further identified. Those items are detailed in Appendix 80 of the report. Matters that are related to current development applications or the appeals to the Ontario Municipal Board aren't touched on in this amendment, which is why you should have an amending memorandum before you tonight, deleting clause number 22 from this amendment. Long story short, we thought it was freed from in-zone appeals, but it's not. Passing this bylaw tonight, per typical practices with housekeeping amendments, will ensure that there are no delays in obtaining zoning compliance where there are identified issues or properties affected. The staff recommendation remains to provide there is no comment received tonight to pass the bylaw as amended in the submitted memorandum, which deletes clause 22 only. I've received, myself at least, I've received no submissions or comment with respect to this amendment. Should anything happen this evening to change that, I'm happy to provide an alternate recommendation for your consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Are there any members of the public with information for council on this matter? Mr. Fay, we welcome your information at the central pulpit.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I'm here tonight on behalf of Mr. Russ Cheeseman, Melrose Investment Solicitor, with respect to item 22, just mentioned by Mr. Nethery. And I'm pleased to see that that has been removed from the bylaw. So my function this evening was to advise you that that should be done. I see it now has been done, so I've got nothing further to add.
So does that mean that we're seeing a happy Mr. Fay?
I think so far, yes.
Thank you very much. All right. Councillor Adams, did you have something? Thank you, Mr.
Not for you, it's for our staff.
Thank you.
Just to be clear. I just wanted to clarify the mapping change. So on page 341 of the agenda is where the mapping change is shown. I just wanted to double check that. As I understand it, that's the rugby club's land right now, or it's used by the rugby club, I should say. And there is consideration there for some additional facilities being built. I want to make sure that the O2 designation wouldn't preclude them from being able to move forward with, for example, having some kind of domed facility for an artificial turf field.
Through your worship to the councillor, the proposed private open space O2 zoning that would apply on the subject lands does permit the use of those lands as a recreational for recreational uses. Whether or not it's if landscaping, if the if the artificial field is approved or not, well, we do have them elsewhere, but I think that's a question better addressed by another planner. So the use of land is permitted.
I'm sorry, you said what needed to be checked by another planner?
I don't know.
Are you looking for another staff member to answer
Yes, if you don't mind, if I can
Okay,
just confer
yeah.
with the director quickly. Through your worship, the director confirms what my suspicions would be. Whether or not it is an artificial surface that goes down or a real grass surface that goes down is a matter that wouldn't be subject to a zoning control.
Sorry, would not be?
It would not be.
Okay, so either way, they're okay.
The use is absolutely permitted in that O2 zone, yes.
Thank you, that's what I wanted to confirm.
We can
Thanks
keep
very much.
rugbying on those lands.
Yeah, okay, that's what I expected was the answer. Thanks.
Councillor Elgar.
Private open space O2 zoning allows buildings to be built as of right?
Through you, your worship, that is correct. The zone does allow for, does provide for a building envelope on site. The uses, any building that would go on site would need to be used for the permitted uses within that zone. To seize upon rugby as an example, I would surmise that appropriate buildings might include a change room, small concession, items like that.
So can you read me the O2 zoning, what it allows, please? Just so I'm clear on it going forward.
Luckily, your worship, I do maintain a consolidation up here. And in the private open space O2 zone found in Part 12 of Bylaw 2014-14, uses include community centers, emergency service facilities, libraries accessory to those uses, museums accessory to those uses, conservation uses, golf courses, outside miniature golf, parks, both private and public, of which the rugby club would probably be one of those, stormwater management facilities, a retail store accessory to an additional permitted use, such as a pro shop at a golf course, a commercial school accessory to those uses, such as a place to go learn how to play golf, an accessory restaurant to eat a sandwich after golf, the sports facility itself, a business office accessory to those operations, and a public hall for having a party after your golf.
So basically, it's everything except housing.
And major retail, employment uses, major office, and institutional uses, yes.
And I'm pretty sure that hasn't changed, and it's always been the case for O2. Any other questions? Then perhaps we could have a mover. Councillor Adams.
I'll move the amended recommendation from staff.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That is carried. So that brings us to the Fernbrook item on Dorval, and the recommendation that the comments from the public with respect to the zoning bylaw amendment application be received. So this is another one of those feedback first, decision later situations, and the file that you've read so carefully will now be summarized for the public by Rob Thun. Mr. Thun.
Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. This is a statutory public meeting on an application for a zoning bylaw amendment submitted by Fernbrook Homes Dorval Limited to permit attached garages, whereas the site-specific zoning on the site permits detached rear yard garages. Your report can be found on page 45 of tonight's agenda. And once again, as you mentioned, Your Worship, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to obtain any further public input to the application. Staff will return in the future upon the completion of the technical review with a recommendation report. The air photo that is before council tonight identifies the application area and its context with the surrounding area. The properties are surrounded by residential development, single detached homes, and Dorval is to the east of the subject property that is outlined in black. So this is Dorval right here. From the official plan perspective, Livable Oakville designates the site as low-density residential with a maximum density of 29 units per site hectare. From a zoning perspective, under bylaw 2014-014, the site is zoned RL8-0 with a special provision 318. The zoning is for the entire subdivision was developed as part of the previous planning process, and it included a zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of subdivision. Excuse me, the applicant is seeking a site-specific amendment for 11 lots to permit 8 attached garages versus the existing zoning bylaw, which only permits detached garages in the rear yard. The concept plan that is before council right now, you will see the 11 lots in this area right here with the red dashed line. Those are the lots that the applicant is proposing to have front attached garage as opposed to rear yard. You will see just to the south of the subject 11 lots, this area here already is partially built for homes with detached garages in the rear yard. A public information meeting was held on November 26th. 8 members of the public did attend that meeting, as well as councilors, or as Councillor Duddick. All public members were in support of the application that attended that meeting. Appendix C reflects a comment that was written into staff following that public information meeting. So in conclusion, Your Worship, as I had mentioned, this is an input meeting, so staff are here to obtain any further input onto the subject application. The application remains in technical review. We will return in the future with a recommendation following the completion of the technical review. So in conclusion, Your Worship, staff are putting forth the following recommendation for Council's consideration.
Thank you very much, Rob. Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter besides Fernbrook's representative? Yes, ma'am. Would you, well, let's start a list. Council, do you want to go after the public or before? We'll start with Councillor Elgar. Who knows, he may cover yours. We'll see. We'll see how psychic he is. Councillor Elgar.
No, mine is related to grading. To the units to the west, will the new units, the 11 units, being at the same grade level as the units to the west?
The grading has already been established through the previous plan of subdivision process, so we'll match.
So they will match, which is great. The only other thing is, I notice it says Ward 4. I believe it's Ward 2 on the first.
Oops.
We'll just
My
transfer
apologies.
that over. Well, these small things happen. Thank you,
I
Councillor.
do that all the time.
So I see 3 members of the public who'd like to give information to council. Ma'am, would you like to be first, and then sir, behind her, you could be second, and then sir, in the back, you could be third? Did I miss anybody? Ma'am, you're up. Yes. If you would identify yourself for the clerk, if all of you would identify yourselves for the clerk when you speak, and then share your information, that'd be terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. So good evening. My name is Leila Kusarik, and I'm one of the residents in the detached homes in the Fernbrook development. We moved into this home in about end of May, so we were one of the first few families to move in. I just wanted to say that I'd like you to accept this application because it's been quite challenging to live in a construction zone for so many months, especially with small kids and park not finished. And so from my selfish perspective, I'd like to see this site finished so we can all start living and enjoying the community we purchased our homes in, as well as from aesthetic point of view. When we look at these homes, the ones with attached garage to the home look much nicer and kind of represent the community, and the price point much nicer. So that's what I want to add.
Well, thank you very much for bringing that sentiment here and that information. Sir? Welcome. Council looks forward to your information.
Hi, good evening. My name is Daryl. I live in this development here, and apparently I live in a home which has a detached garage. Yes, I would think it wasn't the smartest thing to have done, gone with a home with a detached garage, because I live right in that corner lot there, which has that detached garage, and kind of got to realize now in the winter, with all that shoveling we got to do. Also, since we have a smaller driveway, it's just a challenge to drive cars in and out. You know, you got to be driving one in and then the other. And yeah, I guess it would have been smarter for us to go with a attached garage home, but apparently now we already moved in, and I guess we got to live with it. Yeah, that's all I got to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. Sorry. We need a better horseshoe.
Carlo Rachopo. I'm 229 Hanover Street, which is one of the townhomes. I guess I just want to reiterate what the first speaker said. A lot of construction, a lot of mud, And if Fernbrook can sell them quicker and get out of there, we're in full support of that. So we just wanted to let you know that.
Thank you very much for your information. I actually have some friends who've moved there, and they've told me the same thing, but they're not here to say it, so you can set that aside. I don't want to add on their behalf something they didn't come here to add. Councillor Duddick, did you have a question or a comment? That is everybody.
Thank you. I'd be pleased to move this, and I'm glad that the residents came forward tonight because basically they capsulized the concerns I'd heard, plus the fact that the existing people who have that driveway configuration, when I walked the site and had a chance to view it, it is quite tight and very problematic. So in addition to having the site completed, which is of course something all of us would want, from the aesthetic point of view as well as the practical point of view, having them situate or attached like that makes much more sense rather than having it in the rear. So as I say, look forward to it coming back as soon as possible.
Thank you, Councillor. Shall I call the vote? All in, trust me on this. Mr. Fay, did you have anything to add?
Nothing further, Your Worship, no.
Thank you, Mr. Fay. I read his mind, you see. All those in favor? Opposed? The item is received. So now, 3075 Hospital Gate. Mr. Thun, are you up again?
Yes, sir.
Is that double hitter?
Yes. Thank you, Mayor Burton, members of council. This report relates to an item that is on page 61 of tonight's agenda. It relates to a recommendation report related to a draft plan of condominiums submitted by 2359149 Ontario Inc. to create a leasehold condominium related to one building containing 167 units on the hospital lands. It is an existing medical office building that has gone through the site plan process already, is built, and the matter before council relates to tenure. So the individual units are in the midst of being divided up through the applicant for various uses within the medical office building. So just quickly, the existing building is on the east side of Hospital Gate, as you can see by the arrow here. That is the building that has been constructed already. It is on the west entrance into the hospital and north of Dundas Street. The applicant has entered into a 50-year land lease with Halton Healthcare Services for the building itself. With regards to the draft plan of condominium, as mentioned, it is the existing medical office building. Access to this building will come from Hospital Gate. So on the plan, this is Hospital Gate in this location right here. And to the south here is the westerly entrance into the hospital proper that leads from Dundas Street. The development was subject to a site plan application. Final site plan approval was granted in May 8th of 2014. The units have been identified. If there is any question with regards to the size of the units have been identified in the shape and configuration they are shown to allow for flexibility in the marketing and purchasers in the future. As mentioned, the draft plan of condominium will legally create the individual units to allow for the transfer of the ownership to the purchasers. We do have sufficient securities through the site plan process for the development of the medical office building. A full circulation has occurred with regards to the condominium application. No concerns were raised. The building permits have been issued with the building being up as per the approved site plan. And in conclusion, Your Worship, the recommendation is being put forward to grant draft plan approval to the draft plan of condominium.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thun. Are there members of the public with information for council on this matter? There's no listed delegations. Council, are there any questions? Councillor Elger.
Thank you. Mr. Thun, this is an interesting condominium. What happens after 50 years? If I buy one of the units,
right,
it runs for 50 years only?
For 50 years. The
And then
lease for, the lease of the land where the building is for 50 years.
Is for 50 years.
Yes. So that'll have to be renegotiated after that 50-year timeframe. It did go through a consent process for that 50-year lease.
Got it. Yeah, but it's an interesting, it's not the norm.
It is
around
not the
here.
norm. It is for the building only, not the land itself.
Not the land, but the
Yeah.
people that buy the units in the building, something could be renegotiated in 50 years.
The applicant will have to go back to Halton Health Care Services with regards to their existing lease, and then this whole process.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll move the item.
Thank you, Counselor. Let's hope you're here to referee the discussion in 50 years. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, and that is approved. Council, we now come to the Subcommittee of Council proposal for Livable Oakville's official plan review. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. With regards to this, the formation of this subcommittee, and seeing how the town plan must always conform up to the regional plan, I'd like to move that the regional councillors be appointed to the Livable Oakville Council Subcommittee to keep consistency.
Thank you. Is there a seconder? I'm glad I didn't say it on mic. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I can't support the motion. I believe it's paramount to significant importance that the local councillors are as equally involved in the planning of our communities and as council's appointee on the community known as the Bronte BIA. I would respectfully request to be appointed to that subcommittee, and I made that note in writing a couple of days ago.
Councillor, when this motion is disposed of, if enough of us vote against it, it'll be in order to bring another motion. But this motion's on the floor. You can
I know I'm
amend it.
speaking against it.
Okay, you're speaking against it. Any other speakers? Councillor Adams.
Between the two of us, we've already discussed it, and we're happy to have myself be the Ward 6 representative. I presume the motion that's being put forward includes the first two recommendations regarding the terms of reference as well.
Sorry, that's correct, yes.
Okay, then that's fine, thanks.
Shall I call the vote? Councillor Elger.
Just going to say that Councillor Lapworth and I have talked about it, and I will represent Ward 4.
Councillor Dudek.
And
Who
I've
have you
talked
discussed
about
it
it.
with? Councillor Giddings? Yes, I did. All right, I'll put the vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? It carries. Thank you, Council. We now move to the Kerr Village Community Improvement Plan Building Facade Improvement Grant Program Monitoring Report.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of Council. I'm pleased tonight to present the 2015 monitoring report for the Kerr Village Building Facade Improvement Grant Program. The monitoring report stems from the Kerr Village Community Improvement Plan, and it's done in any year a budget is given to the program to ensure that the grant program is administered effectively, to ensure the program continues to meet its goals and objectives, and to adjust the program as necessary to improve its effectiveness. So stepping back to 2014, which was the launch year for the program, 12 grant applications were received. 5 of those applications were carried into 2015 to be finalized. Of those 5 applications, 3 were completed and grants awarded, and 2 agreements expired with no works undertaken and no request from the applicant to extend. Details of the 5 2014 applications are provided in Appendix A of the staff report. In 2015, which is the second year of the pilot program, the town received 6 grant applications, 2 of which have been completed and grants awarded. 2 have been approved to undertake improvements with committed funds, which will carry forward into 2016. 1 was denied, being that the proposed improvements didn't meet our eligibility criteria, and 1 application was incomplete as they did not submit the appropriate materials to process the application, and it was subsequently closed. Funding for the grant program comes from bonusing money, which has already been collected in the Kerr Village area under Section 37 of the Planning Act. In 2015, $150,000 in grant funds were made available for the program. Of the $150,000, just over $40,000 was used to fund 5 projects. $16,500 or thereabouts has also been committed to fund 2 projects in 2015, which will be paid out upon those projects being completed in 2016. If the yearly budget is not used in any program year, the monies are not lost and remain in the reserve fund for Kerr Village. In terms of applicant feedback, staff heard from business and property owners that applied to the grant program that they were generally satisfied with the program and were happy to have had the opportunity to participate. So going through some of the improvements that we saw in 2015, this was an application that was submitted in 2014 and got finalized in 2015. Here you can see the stucco treatment went over the brick that was kind of different colors and not in great shape, and also all the signage was made consistent across the front of the facade. In this application, it was simply an update to the signage as well as the removal of the air conditioning unit above the door, replaced with a new transom window. They also redid the underside of the bulkhead there to just finish it off because it was in disrepair. This was an application that was also received in 2015, which was finished in 2015. You may have saw this from the last year's presentation, but just showing it again because it is finally completed and all the grant has been awarded. So here they replaced all of the dormers with new stucco treatment and new louvers. They also did quite a nice stone treatment along the bottom of the windows and along the side facade, the northern facade. This was another application that was actually submitted in 2015 and completed in 2015, so it can happen in the same year. The top portion was a stucco treatment that was used with the bottom portion with stacked stone, very much an update from what the previous stone application was, and it really cleaned off the pedestrian area behind that front pillar as well. And this was another grant application in 2015 and completed in 2015 for a property that also took advantage of the grant program last year. And this was to do the front door was replaced as well as the garage door treatment to have that kind of open air feeling in the summer months, as well as the cracked window was replaced as part of the application. So some of the highlights on the other findings. One of the key things from last year was that council agreed to waive application fees for encroachment agreements to remedy existing encroachments. So consistent with council's direction to waive the application fees in 2015, this direction resulted in a project being completed and grant awarded for an application that would have otherwise been withdrawn. So in the recommendations that you'll see later, we do recommend that this waiving of application fees continue for this program year. So at the conclusion of the monitoring report, we have to evaluate its effectiveness. In its second program year, approved and completed projects continue to contribute to an improved Kerr Village. Staff are encouraged by the improvements and look forward to promoting the program and continuing to elevate the quality of submissions in 2016. The Kerr Village BIA also remains supportive of the program. Staff are generally satisfied with the improvements completed in 2015, and we look to new ways to promote the program to encourage greater participation. So staff remain of the opinion that the program achieves the goals and objectives of the Livable Oakville Plan, which is envisioned to for Kerr Village to have a revitalized business district. So with that, the recommendations before you today are outlined above, and I'm willing to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, for the good news report. Look at all the questions you got. Councillor Duddick.
Thank you, Your Worship. Not so much a question, but an acknowledgement of the hard work that the planning staff has gone to facilitate this progressing the way it has. You were very kind by saying that the BIA is supportive. They're highly supportive. And having spoken with several of the other business owners in the area, I know one in particular that I sent along to you just ran outside the deadline, so he was very interested in pursuing it. And as I say, it's made a huge improvement. So thank you so much for all your hard work, and I look forward to proceeding further.
Great.
Councillor Robinson.
2 questions. Subsequent to the approval of this initiative for the Kerr Street BIA, Council passed a request for a report a couple of years ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, directed, I think, to Ms. Giles, along the lines of what's happening down the road with respect to specialized funding for Bronte BIA. And I don't expect a specific answer tonight, but I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit of an update on that one. Or if you prefer to come back to another meeting with an update, that would be fine.
Through your worship to Councillor Robinson. Yes, that request, it evolved. We had a few meetings with the BIA, if you remember correctly, and it evolved in us to initiating the Brownie Village Growth Area Review, which is well underway. With respect to funding and a CIP, it's more of the implementation of the policies and the findings that we find, and we're not there yet.
Well, it seemed to me that we liked so much what Kerr Street had that we wanted to try and get something comparable, in other words, money, and I haven't really got anything specific other than the fact that it's being looked at.
Through your worship to Councillor Robinson, the money for Kerr Street was already there.
Yeah, well, yes.
Right, you're aware of that?
Right.
That specifically for this program. The Kerr Street CIP is a pilot project, and our plan is to report back to see, was it a successful thing to do a CIP for one of our growth areas? With respect to Bronte Village, I would say that probably facade improvement isn't the type of community improvement plan you would look for that area. There would be other improvements you'd want to do through a CIP, probably not facade improvement. I think you're looking more for redevelopment.
Yes, for sure, but we're looking for money, and we can't lose sight of that important fact.
Through your worship, I wish I had some money.
And secondly, your worship, I had an email this afternoon from the executive director of the Bronte BIA questioning something, and I'm familiar with Section 37, and I know Sean is too, but I just wondered if a commissioner could respond to that email.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I think the email was from the BIA executive director.
Yeah, what did I say?
Yep,
Yeah.
and her request revolved around what seemed to be some of the issues with people not taking up the money.
Right.
So the 150,000 is the amount we allocate each year through the pilot project, and that gives, I think, about 10 opportunities for applicants. So there has been a little bit more take-up, I think, this year, and that's really the purpose of this report, is to look at whether or not it's the right program for the right area. And I think the conclusion is there sometimes projects take more than 1 year to finish, and sometimes the amount of money that's being offered may not be enough for the kind of improvements they want. And then similar to Bronte, they may be actually looking for redevelopment, so this program doesn't fit their needs. Particularly to Bronte, I think what we're looking at in the growth plan is really a variety of opportunities to offer for redevelopment in Bronte. Very much as Ms. Childs says, community improvement plan may be one of those tools, but other tools would be putting and looking at the appropriate OP policies to allow for perhaps a little bit more opportunities for more development and more uses within Bronte.
Did you get any specific feedback from Kerr Street merchants saying they don't want to or can't afford to participate with their share? Just wondering, that's one of the questions she's asking.
Your worship, maybe I can provide, thank you, some insight. Part of the challenge with taking up the facade improvement was specifically what the commissioner made reference to. A couple of the properties along Kerr, similar to what you have in Bronte, people debate whether or not to redevelop it, or whether there's a land acquisition, or whether or not to retain it and put the money back in, thinking they'll get better tenants for the building. And so sometimes it was that combined with the fact that the reality is people are struggling in the business industry right now. And as a result, even though the town is meeting them in terms of supporting the funding of this, it still is quite an outlay for them financially at a time when maybe it's just not the best for them. So it's kind of a very judgmental issue for them.
So the answer was kind of maybe yes.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Our dealing with, your worship, our dealing with the revised livable Oakville plan, I'm sure will compensate for what we need there.
Well, I'm wondering if we aren't confusing ourselves here a little bit.
A little bit.
Perhaps, if the question is Bronte wants the same money or similar money, the answer ought to include a word of explanation about where the Kerr Street funds came from.
Yeah, we know where it came from.
And maybe the public at this point would benefit from a little clarity about what Section 37 means, because I don't know that the average person watching this conversation would understand that that's not tax money. And and I'd like staff to just give a little help to the public to understand how that money's generated, where it's generated, why it's tied to Kerr Street.
Okay, good idea.
Through your worship. So Section 37 is basically called bonusing under the Planning Act. What it is, it's an exchange for additional height or density on a development site in exchange for a public good. And sometimes those public goods can be monetary and they sit in a reserve fund. So in Kerr Village's case, the development that's currently being constructed at the northeast corner of Kerr and Spears, there was a bonusing agreement in place for that. So they did get some additional height and density on that site in exchange for money that the town has through bonusing. So we're using that reserve fund to do enhancements to Kerr Street. And typically the bonusing money that is collected for any community is meant to stay within that community to kind of offset that increased height and density that that community is experiencing. So.
And just one final piece of information that might help Bronte understand this opportunity better. What are the heights involved in the project that you mentioned?
I believe that that development is approximately 19 stories for one tower and 21 stories for the other.
Thank you very much. I believe the public now has the information it needs to understand both how Section 37 works and how Kerr Street's BIA came into this good fortune. Councillor Dudek, if there's no other questions, would you like to move the item? Shall I call the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that is carried. Thank you, councillors, one and all, for your help on this. Item 10, the Heritage Register update, I believe, is our next destination on this agenda. Welcome, Ms. Shepherd.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. I'm going to quickly run you through a small update to the Oakville Heritage Register. We are proposing the removal of 2 properties from the Oakville Register of Properties of Cultural Heritage Value or Interest. Under Section F, which is the non-designated properties, we refer to them as listed. So I'll deal with the properties that are recommended for removal. The first is a property at 1470 Bronte Road. This is a property owned by the province of Ontario. The property was listed on the Oakville Heritage Register mainly for honorary reasons, as currently municipalities do not have the authority to designate provincially owned properties under the Ontario Heritage Act. However, in recognition that the property did contain what we believe to be potentially significant heritage resources, the W.C. Englehart Farm, Council did add that property to the Heritage Register in 2009. Unfortunately, the farmhouse has been vacant for a number of years, and it did burn down on September 27th of 2015. The site was subsequently completely cleared, so not only was the farmhouse removed, but all existing barns and silos were removed by the province as well. No demolition permit was required for that because it is a provincially owned property. The second property we're recommending for removal from the Heritage Register is 1280 Dundas Street West. And so this property was listed for its historic barn, which was part of the St. Vladimir's Cultural Center property. The barn was burned actually during an event at the Cultural Center. It was being used. I believe it was home to several vintage cars, unfortunately. There are no materials left on the site suitable for salvage. All timbers are unfortunately burned beyond salvage, and the base of the barn is a concrete block, not lake stone. Therefore, we're recommending that this property also be removed from the Heritage Register. The good news, though, is that we would like to add the property at 104 Burnett Street to the Heritage Register. We were made aware of this property by a member of the community who let us know that there might be some historic associations with the early African Canadian community in Oakville. We've done very preliminary research, but we can confirm that this is true. More thorough research would be required to determine if this property is actually a candidate for designation, but in the meantime, in order to protect it against demolition, we do recommend that it be added to the Heritage Register. The recommendation is before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for the report. Councillor Dudek?
If there's, or if and when there's questions or moving the report, I'd be pleased to move it. And there's also an additional resolution on your desk under item 10, and that is that the mayor be requested on behalf of council to express in writing to the province of Ontario through the applicable ministries the town of Oakville's disappointment and frustration regarding the province's poor stewardship of the cultural heritage resources in their ownership, specifically the recent destruction of the W.C. Englehart Farm on Bronte Road is an example of the latest resource to be lost. And I would add that this was something that I raised at our Heritage Committee meeting, and the frustration with not only this property, but we have Spruce Lane Farmhouse, which is on the Bronte Creek Provincial Park, and it was built in 1899, and we've been unable to designate that as well. Not meaning that the province is not caring for it, but there are tools that we can use in regards to this other one on 1470 Bronte Road. Had it been able to be designated, we could have taken the appropriate steps to make sure it was safeguarded, inspected, and that the appropriate precautions were taken, because we realize some of these properties that are not highly visible are good candidates for, unfortunately, unsavory behavior. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Excuse me, Councillor Elgar.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the staff recommendation. Can you expand a little further on how this works? The province owns the property, so the province can tear down barns and every other historic building without us being able to do anything to protect a heritage property on their property?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Elgar, that is entirely correct. The Ontario Heritage Act does not allow for municipalities to designate properties that are either provincially or federally owned. There is a separate section of the Ontario Heritage Act that is actually designed for the province to enact on properties that they own and that are of provincial heritage significance, but unfortunately none of those protections were in place on this property or on any other provincially owned property in Oakville, to the best of my knowledge.
I really appreciate where Councillor Duddick is adding to the item number 10 motion she has before us tonight, and I think it's time for change. It's 2016, so hopefully we can do something. Thank you.
So, Councillor Elgar, is that a suggestion that the letter also ask the province if it would like to designate, with its own powers, its the Spruce Leaf Farm?
I think we have to go after this.
All right, it's Councillor O'Meara's turn, and then Councillor Knoll.
Thank you very much. This this might be a question for our planning as well, but I'm interested in the process of what happens now. So now that it's been delisted, what's the process that the province uses to deal with this piece of land, or what are the opportunities that they're going to be into, or would we have any opportunity to advocate for something? And maybe that speaks to as well, what's the zoning there right now then? If you might be able to fill me in with that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I'll defer to the Director of Planning Services.
Mr. Director, the public at home, because we're kind of in the weeds here, might benefit from starting at the top and just laying out who's on first, like who's mother and who's child here.
Through you, Your Worship, to the councillor, it's my understanding that this property is part of the Bronte Provincial Park. So, I mean, we don't know. I don't know the plans of the provincial government with respect to that, but given its main use is that of the park, it's likely to be used in support of park purposes.
So we're not going to see one day sort of a, well, you know, the province just wants to get rid of this land, and, you know, a developer comes in and says, hey, you know, maybe I can put some houses in here.
If I might be permitted to add some additional clarification, I just want to make some distinction between the two properties we're discussing. So the property that we're recommending to be removed from the Heritage Register is not part of the provincial park. It's my understanding that it's actually owned by Infrastructure Ontario. It's not owned by Ontario Parks or the Ministry of Natural Resources. And so there is the potential that this property is developed sometime in the future. I do not have the information about what potentially could happen in that area, and that is why I deferred to my colleagues in planning.
To Your Worship, it's part of the Greenbelt plan. So in spite of the ownership, it's not going to be developed for anything other than Greenbelt plan type uses.
Okay, well, yeah, pardon me, I assume nothing's going to be happening, you know, tomorrow now that we've delisted it, but just maybe we can keep our head on a swivel and be proactive in terms of what we'd like to see there in approaching the federal government before we get a letter from Infrastructure Ontario telling us what they're going to do with it.
The federal government? Oh. Did you by chance mean the provincial government?
Yes, Infrastructure Ontario.
Okay, so I hope I can add a little bit of useful clarity here. ORC, or it's actually changed its name, it's Infrastructure Ontario Lands, could sell the land to a member of the public. When they sold it to a member of the public, it would still be governed by the Greenbelt. They could change the Greenbelt Act and remove the Greenbelt level from it, but it would then fall under our planning. So the place to look, I think, for a future intention for it would be our own official plan, and I'm not sure how to do that, but during the review, that's certainly a question that we'll want to turn our mind to. So I hope that helps everybody, and I hope I haven't muddied it worse. Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Worship. With respect to Councillor Duddick's additional resolution, I just want to, first of all, thank her for doing that, and just add some additional color to this. The fact is that the province was very much aware of the risk to this property, because I know Trafalgar Township Historical Society and even me as a councillor with some interest in heritage issues spent a lot of time lobbying both MPPs Flynn and at the time Chudley to seek their assistance to try to do something with the property, and even toured with them to say, isn't this a great property? And there was commitments to put fences around it and do all kinds of things, and nothing ever happened. So the province was certainly aware of it, and I'm hoping that somebody will read this letter and certainly at least get the point that Oakville is concerned about the loss of these heritage assets going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Knoll. Councillor Elgar.
Is 1470 Bronte Road also part of the Parkway Belt West plan?
We can certainly check on that, but I believe it is on that section.
Yes.
It's both of them are overlaid on there.
Right. Well, overlaid, and they take precedence over anything else. Thank you.
All right. I guess it's time to vote on Councillor Duddeck's motion. Councillor Lapworth, perhaps I'm wrong.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I noticed the picture on page 115 shows a real estate sign that says sold. What obligation do we have now to notify the old owner or the new owner in the effect that that particular property deal hasn't closed yet?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Lapworth, the Ontario Heritage Act does not require notification to property owners when we are only listing a property on the Heritage Register, not designating. It's been the practice of this council to notify property owners afterwards, and this is to prevent demolition from happening without the chance for council to examine what the potential cultural heritage value is. And so following council's adoption of the recommendation, we will be notifying the current property owner of 104 Burnett Street that the property is now listed on the Oakville Heritage Register. And if they do object to that, there is a process to follow called a notice of intention to demolish, which would then resolve the issues of whether or not the potential cultural heritage value that we think is there is actually there.
Thank you, Councillor Lapworth. Councillor Knoll.
Just a very quick follow-up question on the question that was just asked. I'm curious, and I should know this probably, but are these, I forgot the term you just used, the properties of interest, is that indication listed on title, or is that simply something within our own records? Obviously designation's on title, but is this on title for a potential purchaser to know going forward?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Knoll, no, listing is not registered on title because there's actually no official protection of the potential cultural heritage value of the property other than a 60-day waiting period for a notice of intention to demolish. You are correct. Designated properties, both under Part 4, that's individual designations, and Part 5, Heritage Conservation District designations, are listed on title, but listed properties are not. We are required, though, to make this a publicly accessible list as part of the Municipal Heritage Register under the Ontario Heritage Act. It's available online all the time, and it's also available in hard copy from the Planning Services Department for free of charge.
Would it be a customary process for lawyers that are doing closings to actually investigate that directory? Is that something that would be something done in due course?
Through you, Your Worship, yes, it definitely is.
Great.
We take inquiries about listed properties all the time.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
Councillor Duddeck.
Your Worship, given Councillor Knoll's comments regarding the additional notation or resolution, perhaps we should also have the local MPPs copied on that letter as well.
It shall be done. Shall I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any? And that carries. Council, let's turn to number 11, the Heritage Conservation Easement Agreement for 491 Lakeshore. Councillor Duddeck.
Your Worship, unless there's any questions regarding this, I'd be pleased to move it, and I appreciate the fact that staff have basically summarized the key points that we were concerned about, and I'm quite happy to move the recommendation rather.
Questions, comments from anyone? Shall I put the vote? All in favor? Opposed, if any, and carried. There are no confidential discussion items. We have Heritage Oakville Advisory Committee minutes distributed in another report. Councillor Duddeck, Councillor Hutchins, who's handling this? That would be you. Councillor Hutchins, you have the floor. Councillor Hutchins moves the recommendation in the addendum for the Heritage Committee minutes. Discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Adopted. All right, then back to the main thing. I think we need a motion to rise and report. Councillor Lapworth, thank you for that. All in favor? Opposed, if any, and that's carried. Where is my little report? Thank you. I rise and report that the Committee of the Whole has met and made recommendations on consent items 1, 2, and 3, confidential consent item C1, public hearing items 4, 5, and 6, discussion items 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11, and advisory committee minutes item 12, as noted by the clerk. A mover and seconder for the report are in order. Councillor Lischena, thank you. Councillor Giddings, thank you. All in favor? Opposed? The report is adopted. Is there new business of an emergency congratulatory or condolence nature to occupy us? I see none, Madam Clerk. Then a mover and seconder for consideration and adoption of the bylaws is in order at this time. Councillor Robinson, Councillor Hutchins, and that's 2016-13 in the agenda as revised, and you recall that earlier. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? And the bylaws are adopted. That completes our agenda. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention and your contributions to the meeting. It's been great working with you, and we are adjourned.